Shout out to 78, shout out to Beats, and shout out to Mini Max. I know that all of them have made responses to my Shakur Stevenson video. People have been telling me all about the arguments being put forth in those videos, but I haven't yet had time to watch those videos for myself, but I will try and get round to it in due course. So shout out to all those guys. Anyway, let me give you a couple scenarios. If a man cries in public because he just found out his child or a family member got murdered, would you consider that to be a sign of weakness? In my opinion, no. That would be a perfectly understandable emotional response under those circumstances. I think we can all agree on that, yeah? But what if a man was to burst out crying in public because somebody stole his milkshake from the fridge at work? Would that be a sign of weakness? What if someone called him short or called him fat and he burst out crying in public? Would that be a sign of weakness? Yes, I think most of us would agree that if a man bursts out crying in public in situations like that, it would indicate that he's emotionally fragile and mentally weak. So a man crying in public may or may not be a sign of weakness, depending on the circumstances. Yeah, we can all agree on that. So my question to you would be, where do we draw the line? At what point do we say, okay, this situation is too trivial for a man to be crying in public over? What if what if you beat your best friend at Call of Duty and he starts crying in front of everyone? Is that acceptable? Is that not a sign of weakness? Where are we drawing the line here, people? Because we have to draw it somewhere, innit? There has to be a line drawn somewhere. My argument is, the situation Shakur Stevenson was in did not warrant that type of hysterical crying in public. It was just not serious enough for him to be breaking down in public like that. And so in my view, that was a sign of weakness. Joe Joyce lost in the Olympic final at super heavyweight. A lot of people thought he got robbed. He probably thinks he got robbed. But you didn't see him breaking down in public like that. And there's levels to this shit. We ain't just talking about silently dropping a tear here. That would be more understandable. No, we're talking about Shakur Stevenson straight up bawling hysterically like some teenage girl at a Justin Bieber concert. That was the levels. And as I mentioned in previous videos, Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, Gennady Golovkin all lost in the Olympics. But none of them started crying in public about it. Why didn't they cry? Well, there's three possible reasons. One, they're just not emotional people. Two, they held the tears in because they didn't want people to see them as weak. Or three, they put the situation in perspective in their heads and decided it wasn't serious enough to be crying over. One of the most vital and important character traits for any boxer to have is optimism. The ability to see the positive in every situation. When you have a positive outlook, you're able to mentally recover from defeats more quickly than a fighter who's laying around crying and sulking and acting like it's the end of the world. So when I see a fighter lose and he's immediately trying to take something positive from it right after the fight, that's a good sign. It's a sign that his spirit hasn't been broken. It's a sign that his belief hasn't been dented too badly. It's a sign that mentally he'll be able to rebound relatively quickly. That type of optimistic attitude is what allowed Evander Holyfield to bounce back from the Riddick Bowe defeat, to win the rematch, and later go on to beat Mike Tyson when everybody had written him off. That type of optimistic attitude is what allowed Muhammad Ali to rebound from defeats to Frazier and Ken Norton and knock out the seemingly invincible George Foreman when no one gave him a prayer. These type of guys are always seeing the positive in every situation, which is why they ain't breaking down and crying on camera like some teenage girl because they lost a fight on points. How in the world could Shakur Stevenson view that situation as tragic enough to be carrying on like that? Why wasn't he seeing the positive in it? He made it to the Olympic final, something most boxers never achieve. He's got all these big promoters offering him money to sign, even before the final. Win or lose, he was still in a great position. But somehow he didn't see it that way. He was acting as though the whole world was ending. He was so distraught. He was so negative. It's like, how long is it going to take him to even get over that defeat mentally? How long is this shit going to go on for? How long is he going to be crying into his pillow at night for? 6 months? A year? I mean, how long? What if he meets that same guy who beat him in the Olympics? What if he meets that same guy in the pros? And that guy brings his gold medal to the press conference and starts waving it in his face, reminding him of what happened in the Olympics. Is he going to break down and start crying again? Is he that sensitive? Losing is part of boxing, people. 99% or 99.9% of fighters lose by hook or by crook. So if or when it happens, you need to be able to deal with it in the most positive way possible. Not break down and start acting as though your whole life has come to an end. Shakur Stevenson is obviously talented. If he wasn't, then he wouldn't have made it to the final in the first place. He can definitely win a world title as a professional. He's more than capable of that. But if he don't keep those emotions in check, then he's not going to be able to deal with the ups and downs of professional boxing, as well as fighters who do have their emotions in check in the long run. Emotional stability is key if you want to remain at the top for a long time. Shakur Stevenson is very young. Hopefully he can develop that type of emotional stability and emotional discipline. Some people in the comment section to previous videos on this topic tried to claim that Floyd Mayweather has cried in public before. Well, if he has, it certainly wasn't because of losing a boxing match, because he's never lost as a professional. So perhaps he dropped a tear over some internal pain he was dealing with in his personal life, which again would be understandable. It all depends on the circumstances, as I said at the top of the video. And whatever Floyd is like in his personal life, within the arena of boxing, he is extremely emotionally stable. He's got great emotional control. In fact, just to close out the video, I'll leave you with an example of someone who Floyd fought who never had the same level of emotional control that Floyd had. And that was Zab Judah. Judah was a notoriously hot-headed and emotional fighter. He couldn't control his emotions when he fought Floyd. When Floyd started to get on top, He lost his cool. And we saw that many times in Zab Judah's career. And that played a big part in his downfall. His lack of emotional discipline and control. And Zab Judah was like that in and out of the ring. So this is why I look at Shakur Stevenson breaking down the way he did uncontrollably. And I think, well, if he's like this immediately after a fight, absolutely hysterical, not just, silently dropping a tear, but absolutely uncontrollably hysterical in a situation that's not even that bad. If he's like that there, that doesn't reflect well on his emotional stability as a whole, for me. And with Zab Judah, he was emotionally unstable outside the ring and emotionally unstable in the ring, and it cost him in his career. Yeah? This is the point I'm making. So, when I see a fighter who's emotional, like a Zab Judah, that's when I worry. Because it absolutely is a weakness to be emotional like that within the arena of boxing. Because that emotion can be manipulated and used against you. And that goes for several different emotions. Like anger, for example. If you've got a fighter who has anger issues, that's a problem. That is absolutely a weakness within the arena of boxing. Because when you're angry, you can't think straight. You're more liable to make mistakes. So knowing that, your opponents are deliberately going to try and make you angry. So I like to see a fighter who can control his emotions at all times. And if not at all times, then at least within the arena of boxing. And if the guy is controlling his emotions very well outside of boxing, then it's a good sign that he'll be able to control them in boxing. I'd rather have a guy who can control his emotions 360. But if not, then give me a guy who can control his emotions within the arena of boxing. Not having emotional outbursts here and there. That's the ideal fighter who I'd want to train. Somebody that is very stable emotionally. So, yeah, it's a good sign when a guy's emotionally stable. It gives him an advantage over a lot of his opposition. But when a fighter is breaking down and blowing snot bubbles out of his nose because he lost the fight, that means he's still got some work to do. That's just how it is. So, shout out to all the sensitive thugs in the comment section. You all need hugs. Too much estrogen, too much estrogen in the water where you guys live, man. You need to stop crying because you broke a fingernail. Some of you guys must be on your period, your periods, man. You need to man up, man. Anyway, it's your boy Hatman, I'm out.